Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a very familiar and alarming venue. Yes, we are going back to Alaska, but this time we'll be visiting the Elmendorf-Richardson Joint Air Force Base on the north side of Anchorage. The base is bordered on the west and north by the Knik Arm, and on the south by the city of Anchorage. In the east, though, a stretch of sparsely populated forest stretches from the Chugach Mountains, interrupted only by highways and other roads. The elevation here is below 200 feet above sea level, and thick pockets of spruce, fir, and birch trees tower over blankets of alder and willow bush. There are swamps and creeks here, which run with salmon and other fish each summer, making this area a prime spot for many animals. Moose are a common sight near the base, as well as brown bears and black bears. On the base, families of soldiers live in nearby housing complexes, and one of them is called the Moose Crossing Housing Complex. Moose Crossing is a modern housing development with curving streets, lined with moderately sized homes. Scattered throughout the subdivision are a handful of playgrounds, centrally located for neighborhood kids to access. The slides and swings are padded with sand, so kids don't hurt themselves. Though many of the backyards in the neighborhood are fenced, the playgrounds are placed in the middle of open community yards. Kids and their parents can walk straight across the grass or run and play on it. It is perfect for picnics or games of tag. But what the open grassy layout of the community yard is not good for is keeping the bears of the area away from children. On June 4th, 2010, 4 young girls were having a ball as their ponytails bounced with each jubilant step they took. For the sake of this episode, we'll call them Julie, age 5, Jenny, age 6, Shelley, age 8, and Sandy, age 9. The girls were friends and played together frequently on the playground, just off Campos Avenue, on the north side of the complex. This playground was surrounded by trees and bushes, which gave it a relaxing feeling. This summer day was typical, with temperatures ranging into the mid-50s by the afternoon, with a 6-mile-per-hour breeze and clear skies. It was just another day in paradise, but sometimes it rains, even in paradise. As the girls played and frolicked, a few of the parents looked on and chatted, unaware of a very interested and dangerous visitor approaching them. From the obscurity of the nearby bushes, the girls' giggles had reached the ears of the black bear. It emerged from the brush about 30 feet from the girls and was focused on their movements and laughter. Now, black bears are not a rare sight in Anchorage or anywhere in Alaska. While I was visiting about 13 years ago, one ran right past my friend and I as we shot our bows in his yard. The presence of a black bear likely did get the parents' attention, but didn't alarm them to action. What did get their attention was that the bear didn't disappear into the brush upon seeing the people at the playground. It crouched down just a bit and slowly started walking directly toward the playing children. Upon seeing the approaching bear, Sandy began to yell to alert everyone of its presence. Once everyone started looking at the bear, they began to yell and scream at it too, but it continued its methodical stalk toward the children. Herman Greasy is the wildlife biologist for the 3rd Wing on base. Part of his job was to educate the base residents on how to handle interactions with wildlife and stay safe doing so. He spent time in the schools and made sure to explain to the kids that playing dead was what to do if they surprised a bear. But how do you teach a child what to do when they encounter a bear demonstrating predatory behavior? His instructions were essentially the same as the ones adults received, and included making noise and trying to make yourself appear as large as possible. Remembering these lessons, Sandy puffed herself up and lifted her arms above her head, but the bear continued to slowly step toward the little girls. It seemed mesmerized by their vulnerability. Realizing that her efforts were not frightening the bear, Sandy dashed off toward her home to get her parents, hoping that they would be able to scare it off. Jenny, Julie, and Shelley were much too close to the bear to run away, and somehow the little girls knew that. Their lessons on bear-aware behavior told them that running may cause the bear to chase them, just like kids do when another kid runs from them. The little girls told each other to play dead, just like they were told in their classrooms. One by one, the little girls flopped over and buried their faces toward the ground. By this point, the bear was within just a few feet of the girls. When they flopped over, the bear seemed curious and maybe even confused. These girls hadn't run away like some sort of prey animal, and they weren't fighting like something the bear would have to protect itself against. Befuddled by the little girl's mysterious and instant deaths, the bear began to sniff them as they laid on the ground. It approached Julie and investigated her as she froze, hoping it would leave her alone. The bear stretched out one of its paws and placed it on her back. Julie could feel the pressure of the bear's paw on her back and focused on remaining calm and quiet. She held her hands alongside her head and neck to make sure the bear didn't bite her anywhere that would cause a severe injury. Julie could only wait, as she could hear the bear sniffing her and breathing. As the bear stood on and over Julie, Shelley and Jenny peered through their fingers, hoping it would not hurt their friend. As they watched, they could see the bear drop its head toward Julie's leg and open its mouth. It slowly closed its jaws on Julie's leg, and she let out a squeal at first. Then her fear grew into terror, and she screamed as the bear's teeth punctured her skin. The unexpected reaction from Julie sent the bear scurrying off a few yards, where it paused and stared at her. It didn't expect the girl to scream, and was alarmed by the sudden noise. Just then Sandy's mom came running onto the playground. She yelled at the bear, and it showed no reaction to her presence or her shouts. The girls were instructed to walk to a neighbor's house, and with trepidation slowly obeyed Sandy's mom. As soon as the girls had entered the neighbor's house, Sandy's mom began walking slowly away from the playground toward Campos Avenue. The bear, having found a new fascination, followed her onto the street. Sandy's mom pulled out her cell phone and snapped a few pictures of the bear, just in case there was any way authorities could recognize it from its markings or other distinguishing characteristics. Once Sandy's mom led the kids away and got to safety herself, the bear meandered around the playground for a few minutes. After the people were gone, it seemed to be unsure of what to do next. Neighbors watched it from the relative safety of their houses until it disappeared back into the forest around the housing development. Julie was taken to the base hospital and her wounds were cleaned and sutured. She was left with scratches from the bear's claws where it stood on her back and 4 puncture wounds in her leg from its teeth. The tissue around the bite wound was bruised and sore for a few days, but Julie made a full recovery soon after the attack. The mental anguish from the little girl's experience may scar her for life, but we are hoping it doesn't. As a result of this attack, the base refined its approach to bears. Its educational program that had taught children bear awareness was successful. The predatory behavior of this bear may have been amplified if the little girls had run away. It may have caused an attack by the bear, and the results of that may have been catastrophic. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. What do you think may have happened had the girls run away upon seeing the bear? Do you think the base should have a bear response team? Why didn't the parents have a can of bear spray for such occasions? What would you do if your child was on a playground and a black bear began to sneak up on her? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to Hidden Creek Trail near Skilac Lake on the Kenai Peninsula in South Alaska. In previous episodes on this channel, I've discussed how the Sitka spruce stands intermingle with alder patches to cover the sloping topography and low elevation of this area. The creeks and streams here run briskly with salmon during parts of the summer. This activity is key to bear survival and brings people into proximity with bears. Although there are plentiful moose on the peninsula for the bears to eat, the salmon provide a nearly irreplaceable source of fat and nutrients to the bears. A resource that the bears will defend from each other violently and sometimes to the death. Early summer is a great time for bears in Alaska. Only a few weeks before this time of year, bears emerge from their winter dens, hungry and searching for food. Initially, they feed on plant matter, like sedge grasses and plant buds. From time to time, they may catch a moose calf, or even find an injured moose to feed upon, but the most plentiful food source for them is when the salmon begin to run in the creeks and streams. Around May each year, the first ocean-bound fish that start making their way upstream are known as candlefish, or scientifically, eulicons. These pencil-long fish are up to 20% fat and are among the first fish to run up freshwater streams. These little fish are not only an important source of fat for sea lions, seals, whales, sharks, salmon, and seabirds, they also feed bears, wolves, and eagles on their migration inland. Once they lay their eggs in the silty waters of streams and creeks, their bodies perish and provide food for scavengers and an aromatic signal to bears that fish are migrating upstream. This scent draws bears from their winter dens in higher elevations toward the streams and creeks in preparation for the salmon runs that take place over the summer. If bears fail to capitalize on the various fish runs along the streams, then they may be in for a bleak and desperate winter. At 11:45 a.m. on Thursday, November 16, 2023, a 72-year-old fisherman, whom we will call Dan, was fishing with one of his buddies, whom we will call Chad, along Hidden Creek near Skylac Lake. As any sportsman would agree, a day at the lake is better than any day in the office, and trout fishing at Skylac Lake was proof of that axiom. As Dan and his partner pushed their way through the thick alders along the banks of the creek, they worked their way toward the lake. They'd hoped to land a big lake trout, rainbow, or Dolly Varden, but then again, it wouldn't be called fishing if the results were guaranteed. Besides, it wasn't how big the fish was, but how big the story was. Well, today's fishing story was about to take a fascinating twist. Now, Dan was no dummy when he ventured into the forest to fish. He brought along with him his bear spray, even though bears should be hibernating by this time of year. A familiarity with the risks of venturing into the forests of Alaska made him prepare, at least as much as he thought he should. As the men went from fishing hole to fishing hole, they had varying luck and could see the last remnants of the prior season's salmon run. Salmon carcasses littered the banks in pockets, rotting and signaling the end of the season. The fish were more isolated since the snowmelt had long subsided, and this variation provided pockets of success or frustration, depending on the fish. As Dan pushed his way from one of the fishing holes to another, he approached a desperate and dire standoff with a protective mama brown bear, and was completely oblivious to what lay ahead of him. With the leaves now fallen and the air turned more crisp by the brief fall, Dan didn't expect to be as alert for the location of bears. During prior months, bears would crowd the banks of Hidden Creek and most other bodies of water, but now most of them were denned up, or heading there. Chad and Dan were parting the brush and weaving their fishing poles through the tangled brush when a flash of brown blurred through the bushes toward their left and ahead of them. They could recognize this bouncing ball of fuzz as a brown bear cub, but that begged the question, where was its mother? Before the fishermen could do anything about it, the sow they were hoping to locate made her location well known. With a roar that nearly split their eardrums, the sow emerged from a location just behind where the cub had dashed from to their right. The sow focused her eyes on the fisherman, and primarily on Dan, given he was closer to her cub. In a flash, the sow closed the distance between her and Dan. She quickly swatted the man and bit him several times in a rapid and severe attack. She knocked Dan down and swatted him a few more times before disappearing into the brush to find her cubs. Chad somehow had avoided being attacked by the angry sow and stood afterward, confused and overwhelmed at the speed and violence of the sow's attack on Dan. Seeing his friend laying on the ground, bleeding and stunned, triggered something in Chad. He knew he would have to find help for Dan. Given the men had few options but to walk out, he helped Dan to his feet, and they assessed the damage inflicted by the bear. There isn't a clear source that indicates just how the men managed to get help, but somehow a medevac helicopter made its way to their location. The first responders loaded Dan into the helicopter and quickly flew him out to a hospital for medical attention. Once he was examined, Dan's injuries were labeled as non-life-threatening, which is no indication of their severity. To be categorized as life-threatening, an injury must cause loss of consciousness, impaired cognition, substantial blood loss, head trauma, or breathing problems. That would limit Dan's injuries to non-arterial bleeding, located anywhere but his head or neck. I would say he got out lucky, given he had walked between a brown bear sow and her cub. In response to Dan's attack, authorities closed the Hidden Creek Trail to all visitors. They'd conducted a quick investigation into the attack and had vacated the area no later than 6 p.m. the following Thursday. This was done to allow the sow and her cubs time to calm down from the stressful altercation they'd had with Dan and his partner, and to prevent further confrontations with her. Hidden Creek has been the location of another interesting episode on our channel, and this one indicates a dire trend in brown bear tolerance of human presence in the area. Our prior episode is linked to in the video article below this video, so you can review it if you are interested in learning about it. Authorities cite the backcountry traffic substantially increased following the COVID-19 lockdowns. With an increase in human traffic, starving or hungry bears may be falling back on aggressive and defensive behavior to protect food sources. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Granted that Dan and Chad had brought bear spray, would a firearm have changed the outcome of this attack? Did this sow's cubs see anything that may increase the likelihood of them attacking humans over their lives? What could Dan and Chad have done to avoid such a violent surprise confrontation? What would you do if you found yourself face to face with an angry brown bear sow, armed only with a fishing pole for your defense? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Upper Kenai Trail, accessed from the Skilak Lake Loop Road on the Kenai Peninsula in South Alaska. In some of our previous episodes, we've discussed attacks near this location, and this one took place only a few hundred yards from Hidden Creek. Near Hidden Creek, the terrain opens up to a broad yet small valley. On the west end of that valley, Hidden Creek separates from the Kenai River, which turns east. As it turns, the Kenai River enters a steep canyon, but doesn't lack in alderbrush and patches of Sitka spruce. This canyon forms a boundary of physically demanding terrain, which tends to keep human traffic to a minimum. The steep slopes retreat from Skilak Lake and the fish offered to sportsmen there, leaving only adventuresome folks to appreciate the isolation and solitude of the Upper Kenai River Trail. The allure of wilderness has always beckoned to primitive pilgrims who appreciate the purity and privacy of isolated areas. On June 29th, around 7:38 p.m., Jason Umbriaco and his 14-week-old border collie Buckley were hiking the Upper Kenai Trail and enjoying time in the woods. Jason was visiting the area from Montana and had been learning to live with a brain injury he'd suffered in 2008. He'd leaned on dogs to help him in his rehabilitation. Buckley was his most recent support animal, helping him in his recovery. As the man and his trusty companion were trudging through the bushes, making their way along the trail, they had no idea what surprise lay in wait for them. A brown bear sow and her 2 cubs were trying to find salmon along the banks of the river and headed in a direct route toward the man and his dog. As Jason and Buckley rounded a corner, they heard a rustling in the bushes just above the trail. To Jason's horror, a massive brown bear sow emerged from the brush, followed by her 2 cubs. Jason froze at the sight of the bears and slowly reached for his bear spray. Buckley instantly rose to his owner's defense and furiously closed in on the bears. He dashed toward the sow and her cubs while barking and growling, as if he was going to scare them. The sow reacted with confusion and rage as the dog seemed to threaten her and her cubs. She swatted at the dog and spun in defense of her young ones. Jason wasn't sure what to do as Buckley continually attacked the bears, while ignoring his owner's instructions to come back. After hearing Jason's yelling, the sow lifted her head from snapping at Buckley and set her dreaded gaze on the man. The fury in her eyes communicated her rage as she covered the 50 feet separating them in a flash, before Jason could flip the safety cap off of his bear spray. Jason lifted his hands toward his head as the sow bore down on him. By the time the sow clamped her jaws onto Jason's arm near his elbow, the reality of the situation had set in. He realized this was not some horrific nightmare, but something he had to deal with quickly. The sow shook her head back and forth, jostling Jason violently. As soon as she released her grip on his arm, Jason did the only thing that made sense to him at the time. He leapt from the bank of the river, hoping the sow would relent in her attack on him. As the cold water shocked him into realizing what he had just done, he struggled toward the surface. The sow didn't miss a beat and charged into the water after Jason. By now he had stood to his feet as the rushing water pushed around his waist. The sow sank her giant yellow canines into his shoulder and bit down while twisting her head violently. Quickly ripping deep gashes with her teeth, the sow decided to check on her cubs and made her way out of the river, leaving Jason battered but alive. Jason watched as the sow and her cubs beat a hasty retreat as he called for Buckley. After a brief search, the stress of the attack led Jason to head back to his vehicle to seek medical attention for the wounds the sow had inflicted on his body. Buckley was nowhere to be found and couldn't be heard barking in reply to his calls. Jason hiked quickly, trying to put as much distance between him and the brown bears as he could. Once Jason arrived at his vehicle, he accessed his cell phone and gratefully received service. He called 911 and requested help to his location. While under care at the hospital in Soldotna, the details of Jason's attack circulated quickly among the staff and to the helpful ears of a nurse by the name of Bonnie Nichols. Bonnie had heard from the hospital's chaplain that Buckley was still missing after Jason's condition had stabilized. Bonnie informed Jason that if he would send her a picture of Buckley, she would post it on her social media platforms to try to help locate him.
It turned out that a woman named Wendy Wilson was driving to Anchorage the day Jason and Buckley had the run-in with the sow. She had stopped along the roadside after seeing a stray dog trotting down the shoulder of the road. After rounding up the dog, who turned out to be Buckley, Wendy took him home with her and made sure he had food and a warm place to stay for the night. He was missing his collar with his dog tags, which were pulled off at some point, in the scrap with the bears. Jason identified the pictures Wendy had sent to Bonnie and replied to her social media post. After spending one night at the hospital, Jason was discharged and was ultimately reunited with Buckley. Authorities issued some valuable information to the public following Jason and Buckley's attack. They requested that forest visitors keep an eye out for animal carcasses or the scent of a dead animal. The presence of eagles, magpies, crows, ravens, and gray jays may indicate that there is an animal carcass nearby that may draw hungry bears to the area. Ravens have been observed in a coordinated effort to rouse sleeping bears to get them to catch fish, from which the ravens will receive the scraps. The relationship between predators and the animals supported by their success is an interesting example of how vital the salmon runs are to many species. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think this attack may have played out differently if Jason had had Buckley on a leash? Given this attack happened too quickly for Jason to dispense his bear spray, would a firearm have made any difference? The next time you see a murder of crows, will you be on the lookout for a sleuth of bears? I will gladly read and reply to your comments, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. It is 8.5 million acres of nearly pristine Arctic habitat. It's remote and encompasses the majority of the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. The peaks here can rise to a little over 7,000 feet in elevation, and almost all the park's territory is mountainous. Most of the 10 inches of precipitation that falls here yearly is bound in snow, which melts each spring. This flood of water signals the salmon to migrate upstream to spawn their next generation. Brown bears are then drawn to the willow and alder bushes that grow alongside the waterways to fish for those salmon. Animals you might see include black bears, muskoxen, moose, Dall sheep, wolves, wolverines, coyotes, and lynxes. River otters and beavers swim the creeks, and eagles, hawks, and owls patrol the tundra for pikas, ground squirrels, and lemmings. In the Brooks Range Valley, over 500,000 caribou migrate in pursuit of the most nutritious grazing grounds. Reportedly, only 132 brown bears call the park home, which is a density of 1 bear for every 100 square miles. That means your odds are not great to see one, but in the event you do, the disposition of the bear may be your greatest concern. Robert Bell was born in Ithaca, New York, and received his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He was part of a team of lawyers at Kay, Scholar, Fearman, Hayes, and Handler that had recently won the largest award granted by a federal jury to that point, of $100 million. He was a brilliant man, but was known for being a caring and genuine person, and described as not your typical lawyer type of person. In the months leading up to August 1996, 42-year-old Bell had been planning a backcountry boating and hiking trip with 2 of his friends in the gates of the Arctic National Park. They'd charted their route to travel the river system that followed the Noatak River, which flows north and west into the Chukchi Sea. Bell and his friends would float for part of the day, then beach their boat at planned waypoints. This pause in their float would allow them to hike up trails and take in scenery that most people will never get to set their eyes on. They were aiming to start their big adventure on August 19, 1996. Bell's group had brought backpacks and the typical camping gear to prepare food and set up tents, as most people would do. They'd even had the forethought to attach bear bells to their backpacks to let the bears know they were around. Additionally, they planned to talk and make noise as they hiked, just to make sure the bears got the message. They didn't take any firearms, though. Whether it was a matter of the added weight they would have to carry, or simply the lack of expectation of needing one, either way, they chose not to bring them along. The adventure began with energy and excitement, and by Tuesday, August 26th, they had arrived near the confluence of the Noatak and Kugrak rivers. The location was on their waypoints list, so they beached their boat and gathered their hiking gear to do some exploration. One of the hikers, whom we'll call Sam, decided to stay with the boat and let Belle and their other companion, whom we'll call Mike, go on the hike without him. Belle and Mike spent the better part of the day hiking up the Kugrak River, and after turning around, were on their way back toward their boat. While passing through a patch of 7-foot-tall willows, the men caught sight of a brown bear sow with her cub. They had seen her while still a few hundred yards from her, and had time to discuss navigating around the bears at a safe distance. They planned to make noise as they circled her, so that she would not be alarmed by their presence, and either run away or allow them to pass her. Now, to understand how the men's scents would travel in this environment, we must first discuss the weather. That day there were strong gusts of wind blowing consistently from the north to the south most of the afternoon. Temperatures hovered at just above 40 degrees for the same time frame. There was no precipitation reported in the area, which means that scents would be carried further and in higher concentrations on the breeze. Given the mountainous terrain, scents tend to travel in the same direction as the wind and follow contours like the airflow. If the overall flow of air is along a river drainage, then the scent of the men would tend to travel that same route. A consistent breeze may carry a human scent right past a bear's nose, but even a slight shift could bring the scent directly to the bear. The consistent wind created a noisy rustle that would keep any sound the men could generate from reaching the bear's sense of hearing. Mike decided he would go first and slowly proceeded around the sow and her cub while talking and making noise. It was tense going, and Belle watched from an elevated point to see how the sow reacted as Mike passed by. As Belle watched, he could see the sow lifting her head and sampling the air, but she didn't have an alarmed or aggressive reaction to Mike's presence. This emboldened Belle that his hike around her would go as well as Mike's did. Once he saw Mike wave at him from the far side of the bears, Belle planned to travel the same route and do the same things that Mike did. If it worked for him, it should work fine for Belle too. The only problem with that kind of thinking is that it relies on the predictability of bears. Mike looked on as Belle initiated his turn to pass the bears. He was about halfway through the route and making noise when Mike saw the sow's head lift. She suddenly became very focused on the spot where Belle was making noise. In a split second, the sow became a brown streak that was headed straight for his friend. Mike could hear the willows popping and tossing as the bear blew through them. He next heard Belle yell for help, followed by grunts and growls from the sow. In a matter of seconds, Mike could hear nothing from Belle's location. Not a moan or a shout. Nothing. Mike had no doubts about what had happened to his friend. After his shouts went unanswered, he quickly made his way back to the boat and informed Sam about Belle's fate. The two friends decided to return to the attack site and see if they could recover Belle's body. Once they located his corpse, they knew his death was quick. He didn't struggle very long with the wounds he suffered. They carried Belle's corpse back to the location of their boat to ensure it wasn't consumed by the bears. Now in one of the most remote areas in the world, without a means to reach anyone, the men decided to do the only thing they could do. They worked out a plan to try to signal passing aircraft to summon help. By Saturday, August 31st, the men were flown out alongside Belle's body. Upon examination, Belle was noted to have died instantly from the damage the sow had done to his body. This means that most likely he'd died from a strike or bite to his head or neck, or instantaneous death would not have been likely. Belle's wife, Jody, also an attorney, flew up to Alaska to bring his body home for burial. Following the attack, officials closed off the area to aid in their investigation. They wanted to take a good look at the bear population before allowing people back in the area. After reviewing the circumstances of Belle's fatal bear attack, they decided to take no action against the bear. They deemed the sow's behavior normal for a brown bear protecting her young. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. What triggered the sow to attack Belle, but not Mike? Do you think the noise the men made aggravated the sow? Why on earth didn't these guys pack firearms? Would you have tried to sneak around a sow brown bear and her cub? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Yellowstone National Park. No, we aren't going to the broad expanses of the Lamar Valley or some backcountry trail too close to a bison carcass. The attack we will be discussing happened at one of the most visited locations in the entire park, Old Faithful Geyser. Yes, the crowds of people that visit the geyser in the peak month of July approach 1 million in number. That comes out to about 30,000 people daily and about 1,000 people each hour. The elevation here is a little over 7,300 feet high, and the rolling granite hills are sparsely covered with pine, fir, and spruce trees. Elk, moose, deer, bison, and antelope are visible from nearly any road in the park, but sometimes cause traffic jams here. The raised boardwalks meander a safe distance away from deceptively tranquil pools of boiling mineralized water. Black bears, cougars, coyotes, and wolves roam this area, but the danger they pose pales in comparison to those grizzly bears present. On Saturday, June 24, 1972, 25-year-old Harry Walker was hitchhiking around the country in a reevaluation of his life. He was traveling with his friend, 29-year-old Philip Bradbury from Oxford, Alabama, who went by the nickname Crow. Harry hailed from Anniston, Alabama, and was a farmer. The men had left 19 days prior and wound up in Yellowstone during its centennial celebration. Upon entering the park, the men were allowed admittance for free because they were on foot and not in a vehicle. The rangers didn't do this for everyone, but allowed Harry and Philip in as a favor. While making their way through the various gates and offices, the men had somehow managed to miss all the literature provided regarding the danger of bears in the park. For the past few decades, there had been a debate brewing among biologists and other scientists about just how the park should be run. In 1943, Olaus Murray had called on authorities to close down dumps that park employees used to dispose of their trash. Bears were known to gather around the dump sites, and at one point 7 grizzlies had been observed at a single dump. Given the total population was below 100 bears at one point, that is a significant percentage of the bear population that were relying on dumps for food. For the 8 decades prior, bears had been allowed to scavenge food from Yellowstone dumps, but conscientious scientists noted that they didn't need them, and it was unnatural. Given this permission and encouragement, bears that otherwise would avoid human contact were trained to tolerate and even seek it out for sustenance. Since the bears were hanging out along the roads, begging for food, many visitors safely ventured into the backcountry, which was nearly void of bears in comparison. By the late 60s, the discussion had reached fever pitch, and 2 camps had formed among the scientists. One camp believed in closing the dumps at once and forcing the bears to go back to natural food sources. The other camp was led by 2 biologists, the Craighead brothers. The Craigheads noticed that closing the dumps too quickly would force human-dependent bears to invade campgrounds in search of food. They proposed that road-killed carcasses of deer, elk, and bison be helicoptered into the backcountry to lure the bears away from the dumps. The dumps could then be closed slowly so that lingering bears would follow their noses to feed on carcasses and away from campgrounds. The Craighead brothers summarized their proposal in a 113-page report and delivered it to Yellowstone Superintendent John McLaughlin in 1967. In the same year, a spat of grizzly bear maulings and human fatalities occurred in Glacier National Park and became known as the Night of the Grizzlies. 2 women were killed by bears habituated to eating from dumps near ranger stations. The potential of having a similar occurrence in Yellowstone prompted McLaughlin to order an immediate and sudden closure of all dumps in the park. Visitors to the park were not provided bear-proof dumpsters at this time and weren't particularly afraid of having bears come into their camps. After all, only a few years prior they were allowed to hand-feed bears along the roadsides. Their perception of bears was that they were harmless and wouldn't hurt you, even if they did eat all of your food. Grizzlies being grizzlies, the closure of the dumps caused an enormous uptick in bear attacks and hostility. The rangers were charged with protecting the public, so the problem bears were shot, reducing an already low population to near extinction. In 1970, 57 grizzlies were killed by people, and only 5 years later, just 136 grizzlies remained. This brings us back to Harry and Philip's visit to the park. The men had decided to camp at Old Faithful Geyser at an unauthorized campsite. Rangers knew that many visitors were illegally camping but overlooked it, neglecting to enforce the laws due to the experience people were having. They pitched their camp only a few hundred feet from the boardwalk behind a screen of lodgepole pines. They could easily walk to the creek for water from there and only had to worry about the rangers chasing them out. Just behind their campsite, a thick growth of smaller trees screened anything hiding within it from view. Since the park authorities failed to notify the public of the dumping ground closures, the men were unaware of the danger they were in. What Harry and Philip didn't know was that a sow that lived in the area had been known as a problem bear. The ranges had coordinated her relocation previously, but she'd always found her way back. She was a regular at the dump behind the Rabbit Creek Ranger Station, which was closed, and now she was looking for a new food source. The Craighead brothers had conducted a 10-year study on the grizzlies in Yellowstone Park, in which this sow was an unwilling participant. They had pioneered the use of radio collars for collecting data on bears and their travel patterns. She was caught and collared by the brothers and was labeled as Bear 1792. By the end of the Craighead study, all data and observations regarding the location and travel patterns of bears had ended at the same time the dump sites were closed. At the time of her capture and collaring, Bear 1792 was noted to be an older female with worn-out and broken teeth. When she was relocated, she was moved to an area only 18 miles away and easily found her way back. Now Harry and Philip were enjoying their time in the park, and Philip had taken LSD that evening. They spent a good portion of the night wandering the geyser basin, chatting with people, and soaking in all that the park offered. By around 1 a.m., they were headed back to their clandestine campsite, using their flashlights to illuminate their way. The men were what rangers would call dirty campers. They left their food storage on the ground and didn't remove their food waste from their campsite. As they approached their tents, Harry paused and asked Philip if he'd heard something. The men craned their necks and heard chewing sounds coming from just a few yards away and near their tents. Harry lifted the beam from his flashlight in the direction of the noise, and it was immediately filled with the open jaws of a charging grizzly bear. The sow was upon the men before they could do anything but yell. Harry was knocked down with a swat of the bear's paws, and Philip turned to run. Within the first few steps of his retreat, Philip was sent tumbling down the hillside. He rolled and tumbled several yards, giving him separation from the bear's anger. The sow immediately turned back toward Harry and pounced on him in a frenzied attack. Philip could hear the bear growling and his friend howling in pain as he ran a short distance before turning around. He hadn't seen Harry, but was sure the bear had left. They had merely surprised her after all, and he was hopeful that she'd fled after sending the men running. Philip turned his head toward their camp and yelled, "Harry, did the bear leave yet?" His question was met with Harry's plea, "Help me, Crow." Harry's cries for his friend brought the sow back to finish what she'd started. Philip turned and stumbled toward the Old Faithful Inn about a quarter-mile away. Philip followed the lights on the building to its front doors and stumbled inside, breathing heavily and exhausted by about 1:10 a.m. He stammered that his friend had been attacked by a bear and needed help. The rangers headed out to the campsite, but were uneasy about entering the timber in the dark of night. Calling out for Harry and hearing no reply, they returned, deciding to wait until morning. By sunrise, a handful of rangers had returned to the men's campsite and quickly found Harry's remains. The grizzly had partially consumed his body, so they gathered his corpse to deliver to the coroner. They next set out snares and used road-killed carcasses as bait. The sow returned to the place where she left Harry's corpse and was snared, allowing rangers to capture her. While restrained by the snare, she was shot and killed. The carcass of the 400-pound sow was taken to Montana State for analysis. The forensics team there found human hair on the sow's claws. Her stomach contained tinfoil and other camp debris that she'd consumed at the men's campsite. Following Harry's death, his family filed a lawsuit alleging negligence on the part of park management. They won their case in circuit court, but the Ninth Circuit overturned the circuit court's decision. The Supreme Court refused to take up the case, and Harry's family lost their farm, seeking justice. Their efforts did lead to the park refining policies on how bears were managed. Although the dump site supported the bears, it caused a very negative change in their behavior. For several years after their closure, bears were observed digging in dump sites that had long since been covered over. The grizzlies clearly remembered their former source of food and would regularly visit in hopes of finding more, even decades later. Due to mismanagement, grizzly bear populations bottomed out in 1990 at only 99 bears. It has taken almost 30 years for populations to reach their current levels of an estimated 750 bears. A book by the name of Engineering Eden, written by Jordan Fisher Smith, discusses this attack and its ramifications on modern environmental policy. I've linked to it in the pinned comment below, so check it out. I've also provided a link to the information revealed in the lawsuit filed by Harry's family. It paints a clear picture of the park's negligence. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Were park authorities negligent in their actions, or do park visitors assume the risk while in the park? Should people be involved in natural processes, or leave them alone? Should grizzly bear populations be managed through hunting or relocation? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Many Glaciers Campground in Glacier National Park, Montana. The mountains in this area are part of the Rocky Mountains and are generally around 8,000 feet high, with Mount Cleveland stretching up to 10,466 feet in elevation. The granite peaks retreat to valleys filled with timber of pine, fir, and spruce trees, mixed with stands of aspen, willow, and berry bushes. Common animals here include white-tailed deer, elk, and moose. Predators in this area include black bears, cougars, wolves, and grizzly bears. In the Many Glaciers area of the park, there had been a series of grizzly bear run-ins that were alarming. The plant life around the campground makes a favorable lowland forage site for sow bears raising cubs. The nutritious plants and abundant insects provide key nutrients for growing and adult bears. Boar grizzlies will often battle to include these kinds of areas in their territory to increase concentrations of sows for breeding purposes. Given the quality of bear food sources in this area, bear populations have been ticking up by about 30 bears each year. With governmental protections preventing hunting, the population has increased significantly in younger bears, which may be learning how to fit into the bear and human worlds. This learning curve involves younger bears raiding campsites and breaking into coolers and garbage cans. Habituation of human sources of food creates a dangerous and tenuous situation that presents a hazard to humans and bears alike. In the Many Glaciers area, 2 young grizzlies had been reported exhibiting aggressive behavior. One of the young bears had a particularly hostile attitude toward the presence of people. On July 7, 1976, William Schweighofer was sleeping in his tent at the lower campsite at Logging Lake. William was awakened in the middle of the night by the overwhelming mass of something pressing against him. As he reached his hands out of his sleeping bag, he could feel the round, large shape of a grizzly bear's rump pressing him down through his tent. William yelled and pushed against the bear's rump in an alarmed effort to scare it away. Instead of fleeing, the grizzly turned its jaws toward the man's voice and drove its teeth into the flesh of his arm. It used its bulk to hold him in place until it got a firm grip on his shoulder and repeatedly bit into his arm and shoulder as it did so. Once it got a hold of him, the bear began to drag William several yards while he was still in his sleeping bag and tent. After dragging William many yards, the bear lost interest and meandered off, leaving the man in pain and suffering from lacerations and puncture wounds to his arms and shoulder. Only a few weeks later, on August 15, 1976, 17-year-old Pam Sue Wise and her friend, Pam Benda, were having fun while hiking along the Ptarmigan Falls Trail, which led to Iceberg Lake. As they hiked along, they glanced behind them and noticed a huge grizzly bear was following them. The women immediately dropped their backpacks from their shoulders and pulled themselves up into a nearby tree. They were hoping the grizzly may have been interested in the contents of their backpacks, but watched as the bear approached the tree and stepped over their packs. It stood on its hind legs and scratched at the bark of the tree, trying to find a grip to climb up after them. It growled as it stared at them and raked its claws over the tree trunk. After a few futile attempts at climbing the tree, the grizzly turned and wandered off a short distance. Just when the ladies thought they were safe, the grizzly returned to the base of their tree. It clawed the tree and tried to pull itself up to get at the women one more time while staring at them and growling. Having been frustrated in its attempt to climb the tree, the grizzly wandered off for good this time. Eventually, the women were able to escape and reported the incident to rangers. A few weeks later, on September 9, 1976, Roscoe Black and Teresa Wadden were enjoying a hike to Stony Lake. While near the lake, 2 grizzly bears stormed out of the bushes along the trail. The most aggressive bear bit a big hole in Roscoe's calf and lacerated Teresa's arm, shoulder, and back before departing. Although their injuries were not life-threatening, they indicated a dangerous increase in violence and intensity in the two grizzlies' hostility toward people. On September 19, 1976, Karen Kuntz was relaxing while reading a book near the outlet of Fish Gap Lake. As she read, a rustle in the nearby bushes drew her attention away from her book. Two huge grizzly bears stepped out of the bushes a mere 5 yards from Karen, to her horror. Knowing that running may elicit a predatory response from the bears, Karen pulled her jacket over her head and hid herself away, remaining still. She knew if she could see the bears approach, her fear would be obvious. The bears stalked toward her, sniffed her jacket, and investigated her scent. While the bears sniffed Karen, some noise from the lake drew their attention away from her. The two grizzlies' heads snapped toward the lake where two of Karen's friends were fishing. The two men were 21-year-old Kerry Odell and 29-year-old Donald Breward. Upon locking eyes with Breward, the more aggressive grizzly dashed toward him. Breward was near the shore of the lake and immediately swam for deeper water, with the bear chasing him. As you can imagine, it took very little time for the grizzly to catch up with the man. Breward yelled and kicked at the bear with his fishing waders, hoping it would leave him alone. One of Breward's kicks was caught by the bear, and it drove its teeth through his wader boot. The man curled his toes to avoid having them severed by the bear's teeth. The noise and resistance Breward put up drove the bear back to shore and toward Odell. Kerry had watched the bear chase Breward into the water and made the best use of the time by climbing up a tree near the shore. Once the bear had abandoned its attempt to attack Breward, it focused its energy on Odell. The grizzly approached the tree that Kerry had climbed into and found a few lower limbs that it could lift itself up. The bear climbed the tree to the point it could claw Odell. Rather than staying in the tree as the bear tore him to ribbons, Kerry leapt from the tree and dashed into the lake in Breward's direction. The two men swam across the lake to avoid the shoreline near the grizzlies, where they met up with Karen. The trio immediately hiked out and reported the incident to park rangers. After receiving the second complaint for the same day regarding grizzlies in the campground, Ranger Reese was dispatched to investigate the reports. Upon arrival, he observed two grizzly bears that he could tell were 3 to 4 years of age and were each approximately 250 pounds in weight. They looked nearly identical, but behaved very differently. One of the bears was more docile, while the other was much more aggressive. He also noted that the sign indicated the campground's closure due to bear activity had been torn down by a bear. Agent Reese helped with the installation of 2 culvert traps at the lower end of the campground. The hope was to capture one of the bears and relocate it to a more remote section of the park. This would hopefully change the behavior of the remaining bear, in theory. The difference between theory and practice is what happened. At 7 p.m., Ranger Reese showed up at the Many Glaciers campground to brief its occupants on the recent bear activity. He gathered the 19 campers and discussed proper food and waste disposal and bear-aware behavior. Among the campers were 5 young women who were sharing a campsite. They were in site number 74 and included 21-year-old Mary Patricia Mahoney, who was sharing a tent with Barbara and Patricia Tucker. Also with them were Ellen Feynman and Jennifer Thompson, who were sharing a second tent. The women listened attentively to Ranger Reese's information and even asked several pertinent questions. They were already practicing bear safety guidelines and seemed to need confirmation that they were doing things correctly. After the informative meeting with Agent Reese, Feynman and Thompson decided to go to bed, while the other 3 women stayed up a little longer. A short while later, the other 3 women made their way to their tent, with Mary laying her sleeping bag nearest the tent door. At a little after 6:30 a.m., the women were jolted awake by the sound of a bear's claws being raked over the tent fabric near Mary. As the bear pawed the tent, it clawed Mary through the fabric. She began screaming from the pain and terror. Patricia was laying beside Mary and told her to be quiet and lay still, while her sister squeezed Mary's hand. Mary's screams sent the bear into a momentary retreat. Mary was beside herself and moaned while the women pulled themselves deep into their sleeping bags and covered their heads. She couldn't help but moan out of pain and fear, and this likely brought the grizzly bear back to near her location in the tent. Using Mary's moans to approximate her location through the tent fabric, the grizzly pounced on her and ruthlessly attacked her. Her muffled cries of pain echoed through the campground and woke Feynman and Thompson. Ellen and Jennifer had heard Mary's cries and the huffing and growling of the bear as it attacked her. They bolted from their tent, sprinted the short distance to their car, and climbed inside. As the two women watched, they honked the horn on their car while the grizzly mauled Mary until her cries ceased. Then it emerged from the tattered tent, dragging her sleeping bag. The bear carried off the sleeping bag just before Patricia and Barbara streaked toward the car. They joined the other two women in the car's safety and wondered aloud what had happened to Mary. The Tucker sisters explained to Patricia and Barbara that they had seen the bear dragging Mary's sleeping bag away, but didn't see what direction she had fled. They assumed she had made it to a tree and climbed it for safety, but couldn't confirm that hope. After all the honking and screaming, the other campground visitors began showing up to investigate the noise.
Harry Mertz was one of the campers and immediately hurried toward the ranger's camper to report the bear activity.
At 6:50 a.m., Ranger Reese was awakened by Mertz and hurriedly got dressed. Upon arriving at the scene, Reese met up with Stu Macy, an off-duty ranger from California. The two rangers decided to see if they could find Mary and headed off into the lodgepole pine stand nearby. Only 20 feet from Mary's tent, they found her empty sleeping bag spotted with her blood. They could see a drag trail leading away from the bag and slowly followed it toward Swift Current Creek. Along its path, they could see blood spatters and pieces of human flesh. A little further along the drag trail, they found Mary's T-shirt. It, too, was splotched with blood and tattered. Following the drag trail a little further led the rangers to a severed piece of her scalp, and then on to Mary's body. It was laying face down. A significant portion of her upper body had been consumed already, but there were no bears in sight. The rangers immediately cordoned off the area and ordered all campers to leave the campsite. The campground was vacated by all its occupants no later than 7:45 a.m. District Ranger Bob Frausen arrived at the campground as quickly as he could and brought with him his shotgun loaded with slugs. After Mary's body was found, he left to call the coroner and bring in more help for the rangers.
Once Frausen returned, he met a chaotic scene with people yelling from two locations far apart from one another.
Near Swift Current Creek was one group of people yelling about a bear, and to his left another voice could be heard, stating similar things. He knew where Mary's body was, so he headed toward it first. Frausen and another brave volunteer picked their way through the lodgepole pines. The silhouette of a grizzly suddenly emerged, and Bob fired a slug into its shoulder. As the bear spun to flee, a second grizzly came into view, and they both disappeared into the brush. Frausen gathered a few more men to his hunting party, and they began tracking the grizzlies. They searched gravel bars and executed sweeps on thick timber stands in the area where the bears were last seen. One of the hunters spotted a grizzly and fired at it, with Bob following up with one shot from his shotgun. The bear dropped to the ground with the impact of the bullets. As the men approached the dead bear, they could see there were two nearly identical bears in the same spot. Both bears had dark fur with silver-tipped guard hairs and weighed about 250 pounds each. The rangers determined that these two bears were likely litter mates who had remained together as a hunting team after their mom had booted them to fatten up for the winter. With the bears now dead, the hunters returned to Mary's corpse. Once they arrived, they found Macy several feet high in a tree. He had been left to guard Mary's body when one of the grizzlies had returned and chased him up the tree. It was Macy's cries that Frausen had heard. Frausen was tasked with examining the bears' carcasses. After looking over their paws, he found blood and flesh in their claws. Lab analysis would confirm that one of the bears had human blood on its claws, while the other had bear blood on its claws. This meant that one of the grizzlies had located the grizzly initially wounded by Bob and had stood guard over it as it died. Now this is where this investigation takes a very confusing turn. The lab had opened up the stomach of each bear to examine the contents. Neither bear was found to have human flesh in its stomach. An examination of scat piles left around the area also showed a lack of any human tissue. Frausen was a very experienced ranger and offered an insightful explanation for this. He indicated that while he was investigating a predatory bear attack in Alaska, a bear that was known to have killed and eaten a man was examined. Upon performing a necropsy, the bear's gut was found to be devoid of any human remains. This bear was younger, just like the bears in this attack. A further examination of the attack site yielded human remains that had been regurgitated by the bear. It seems that younger bears do not have the proper enzymes to digest human flesh, or are so unfamiliar with it that they will vomit it after consumption at times. The timeline of the attack is as follows. Mary was attacked and killed at 6:45 a.m., and Ranger Reese was on site by 6:50 a.m. The bear or bears had killed Mary and eaten a portion of her upper torso by the time the rangers found her corpse. The bears had left, then returned to Mary's corpse, where they were killed no later than 8:30 a.m. the same day. Mary Patricia Mahoney died as a result of injuries sustained during this grizzly bear attack, and was only the third mauling victim in the park's history to that point. The prior 2 maulings were detailed on the Night of the Grizzlies episode on this channel. I've linked to it in the video article below if you would like to compare the 2 incidents. No other campers were injured during the attack on Mary. The campsite was closed until the investigation was concluded. All 5 women had followed all safety guidelines regarding food and waste. They had not attracted the bears to the campsite, and an explanation for this attack could not be concluded. While reviewing this attack, park authorities did acknowledge that some campsites were located near or on known bear travel routes. Changes were made to site locations, albeit too late to prevent Mary's death. After reviewing the details of this episode, I'm left with many questions for you, but will ask you only these. Why did the park officials wait to eliminate these 2 grizzly bears until Mary was killed? Does the fact that only one of the 2 grizzlies demonstrated aggression toward humans shatter the notion that cubs learn to predate on people from their mothers? Does the fact that cubs will vomit human remains due to lack of enzymes to digest human flesh indicate that they are not our natural predators? Did the rate at which the bears ate Mary's upper body surprise you? It sure surprised me. I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a section of the Iditarod Trail near Rainy Pass Lodge in the Alaska Range, in the state of Alaska. The Happy River runs through a broad valley, and its waters fill pockets of muskeg and small ponds. It is the first major valley just west of Denali National Park, and is almost as pristine and wild as it. The famous Iditarod Trail runs through the 2-mile-wide valley as it makes its way from Anchorage to Nome. The mountains here top out right at around 6,000 feet in elevation, with steep peaks giving way to sloping, lush valleys. The animals in this area are quintessential Alaska iconography, with caribou, moose, and Dall's sheep meandering meadows and gorging on greenery. To balance prey animals, predators like wolves, black bears, and brown bears patrol the prairies. The evergreens here include cedar, spruce, pine, fir, and hemlock, with aspen, alder, and poplar trees dropping their leaves each fall, creating a colorful display. Willows, sedges, and grasses cover every space that trees do not, providing food and shelter for its denizens. On the afternoon of Sunday, June 27, 2010, 54-year-old geologist Robert Miller was exploring mineral locations for Mill Rock Exploration. He'd worked as a roofer only 5 years prior and wasn't afraid of sweating and taking risks. He was armed with a .357 Magnum pistol and was not carrying bear spray. It was a nice day with temperatures reaching into the lower 50s, and spattering rain interrupted the mostly clear skies. Spending the better part of the day looking at potential mineral deposits, one of his last remaining tasks was to carve out a helicopter landing spot for his extraction. Packing a small handsaw with him, Robert began falling bushes and dragging them out, creating a small clearing. The helicopter pilot agreed to contact him by radio when he was within 5 miles of Robert's reported location, so Robert rushed to complete the impromptu landing pad. Over the din of the saw ripping its path through limbs, Robert didn't hear the approach of an angry grizzly bear, if it made any noise at all. He noticed it when it was only a few yards from him, and it wasn't growling or snarling. The bear dashed for Robert and covered the 25 feet separating them in about 1 second. Robert had just enough time to pull out his .357 Magnum pistol from its holster and fired off a single shot in the bear's direction. He wasn't sure if he'd hit it or not, and immediately dropped onto his left side into the fetal position. Robert clasped his arms around his neck to protect it from the bear's claws and teeth. The grizzly wasn't convinced by Robert's acting job, and bit onto his right arm repeatedly, puncturing it in several places. He felt the bear's teeth dig into the area around his funny bone at his elbow, but failed to see the humor. The popping of his bones told him that the bear had broken Robert's olecranon process during the 15-second attack. After the bear vented its fury on him, it wandered off into the brush. Robert was relieved at the relent of the bear's attack and pulled himself up to his knees. As soon as he glanced around, Robert spotted the bear, only 40 yards from him. At this point, Robert still held his pistol and managed to squeeze off 2 more shots before diving onto the ground once again. Given he is right-handed and his right arm bore the brunt of the damage during the bear attack, Robert was sure he had missed both shots. Robert dove face first into the dirt and placed his arms around his neck once again. He could feel the overwhelming pressure of the bear's teeth as they ripped through his flesh and bites placed all over his body. With adrenaline dulling the pain, he lay still and played dead as best he could. The bear swatted Robert and chewed on any part of the man's body that would fit in its mouth. After ripping at the man's flesh for several more seconds, the bear once again disappeared. This time Robert didn't move for several minutes, knowing the bear could be nearby watching him. His mind raced as he listened and hoped that the bear had gone for good this time. Unsure of where his pistol had gone and hoping he could find his radio, Robert peered through the corner of his eye, searching for the bear. After hearing nothing for several minutes, Robert tried to lift himself to his knees once again. His body didn't seem to respond to his commands, and he realized he was too severely injured to regain his feet. Searching his breast pocket, Robert found his radio. Holding his radio near his mouth, Robert pressed the button and stuttered, "Mayday, Mayday," hoping for a response. Every 20 seconds he would repeat this call for help, but received no reply. After 20 minutes, a voice crackled over the radio. It was the helicopter pilot who was oblivious of the bear attack on Robert. The pilot was contacting Robert to let him know he was within 5 miles of the scientist's last reported location, as they had previously planned. Relaying the details of his altercation with the grizzly, Robert watched as the helicopter piloted the craft directly overhead. The helicopter then circled Robert's location in an increasing radius, searching for the bear's location. After determining the bear had fled the scene, the helicopter pilot informed Robert that he would be returning with a medic, and flew off. Ryan Campbell was in the next valley over and was a wilderness-trained medic. The pilot contacted Campbell and landed nearby to take him to Robert's location. Campbell was dropped off near Robert and quickly rendered first aid to the injured man. The sensation of burning and electricity seared through Robert's body as an antiseptic was applied to his wounds just before they were bandaged. Campbell helped load Robert into the helicopter, and he was flown to the Rainy Pass Lodge a few miles from the attack site. Lodge owner Steve Perrins helped triage Robert alongside Campbell, and that is when the pain began to set in. Organizing a relay flight, Robert was flown to a nearby airstrip where an emergency medical technician was waiting. The medical helicopter was better equipped to render first aid and departed to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage while the crew worked to save Robert's life. Robert's left ear was stitched back onto his head, and his other injuries were sutured shut after further cleaning. Rick Sinnott, an Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist, stated that Robert was very lucky to have received the injuries he had, given they could have been much worse. He also relayed the fact that Robert's choice in firearms was inadequate to protect a person from an attacking bear. Sinnott concluded by saying that playing dead likely saved Robert's life. Following Robert's grizzly bear attack, Perrins returned to the area in search of the bear. His party could not find any evidence of the bear being wounded from any of the shots fired from Robert's .357 Magnum. It had clearly left the area and was likely uninjured. There was no indication of cubs being present at the attack site, and no action was planned against the bear. Robert expressed no animosity to the bear after his attack. He indicated that the bear was just doing what bears do, and that the incident was unfortunate. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the bear was just as surprised as Robert at their close-range encounter? Do you think the bear creeped up on him while he was cutting limbs? Would bear spray have prevented this attack? Was this attack defensive or territorial? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to George Lake, just outside of the small town of Delta Junction, Alaska. The city of Fairbanks is about 90 miles north, and the U.S.-Canada border is only 105 miles east, depending on how far you stretch the measuring tape. The Tanana River system starts just inside the national boundary and winds its way through the Tanana River Valley, where it meets the Delta River. To the north lay the White Mountains, and at their foot rests George Lake. The lake has become a trophy fishing mecca, with abundant northern pike pulled from its icy waters. With a subarctic climate, winters will frequently dip below minus 40 degrees. The majority of precipitation will fall as snow, with average accumulations approaching 5.5 feet each year. Common plants in this area include black and white spruce, American dwarf birch, with aspen trees creating a canopy above wild lingonberry, crowberry, and bog blueberry, yielding their delicious fruits. Roaming the forests here, you'll find moose and wood bison. The predators here include lynx, coyotes, wolves, black bears, and brown bears. On Thursday, June 7, 2013, 64-year-old Robert Weaver and his wife were arriving at their lakeside cabin. Robert was the owner of George Lake Recreation Rentals and was aided in his business by his doting wife, whom we'll call Rita. As they pulled up to the dock in front of the cabin, they could see a black bear very close to it. Tethering the boat to the dock, they began to yell at it in an attempt to drive it off. The brush nearby seemed more inviting, so the bear took shelter there, while keeping an eye on the couple, now making their way ashore. Now burdened by the items they were carrying toward the cabin, Robert and Rita were distracted and seemed to have lost focus on the black bear. As they walked the path toward the cabin, the bear must have circled around to approach them from a hidden location on the side of the trail. As Robert walked past the concealed black bear, it leapt out of the bushes and tackled him to the ground. The bear's teeth latched onto Robert's flesh as its claws tore at him. He yelled out for Rita to get to the cabin as the bear straddled him. Rita quickly made her way into the cabin and looked out the window, hoping that Robert would fight the bear off and get inside with her. She realized that she would need to help him, as the bear was overwhelming him with its power and tattering his flesh. Rita searched the coat closet for a hunting rifle that was stored there. Picking it up, she knew she'd have to risk injuring her husband further in order to save his life. She bolted for the door and was soon standing only a few feet from Robert, who was still thrashing in resistance to the bear. Now Robert knew how to handle this rifle, and always took care of anything involving it, but that responsibility now fell to Rita. She was woefully unfamiliar with how to operate the rifle, and managed to partially work around into the chamber before jamming the action, rendering it useless. The rifle jammed at the most critical time of need. She pried at the rifle and tried to dislodge the cartridge, but knew her husband didn't have much time. Reaching a point of frustration, Rita ran back into the cabin and grabbed anything she thought she could throw at the bear. Approaching the angry Bruin, she would throw item after item at the bear, but it focused on her husband, regardless of her actions and screams. While Rita threw things at the bear, it periodically glanced toward her, but stubbornly returned to mauling her husband. She knew that she could do nothing to save his life, and her mind drifted to what the bear would do once Robert was dead. Deciding that after it was finished with her husband, it would come for her, Rita made her way back into the cabin. She blockaded the door with furniture and sheltered inside, hoping the bear would leave her alone, but her hopes would soon prove to be in vain. The black bear approached the front door to the cabin and began prying at the blocked door. It pushed and pulled at any aspect of the door it could work its claws into. The bear wasn't satisfied with having Robert's corpse to eat, as it clearly wanted to kill Rita as well. Rita knew she had to reach out for help, as the bear was not scared of her, no matter what she did. She used her cell phone to dial 911 and begged for immediate help. Alaska State Troopers boarded an R-44 helicopter and tried to land near the cabin, but the terrain was too treacherous. The muskeg and dense stands of trees surrounding the cabin forced them to reconsider their rescue plan. Eielson Air Force Base sent out a rescue team aboard an HH-60 Pavehawk helicopter, which was equipped with a hoist. As the helicopter hovered, a black bear busted from brush and menaced the men emerging from it. A warning shot sent the black bear into the nearby brush, allowing them to proceed with their mission. The helicopter dropped a team of rescuers nearby the cabin as an additional patrol officer was brought in by boat. They made their way to the cabin by 9 p.m. to rescue Rita and recover Robert's body. With all of the din from the helicopter and the airboat, the bear had been driven off of Robert's corpse. With Rita now safe, the authorities began an investigation into her husband's death. They were marking out the area and any evidence they could find when a black bear lunged from the brush and tried to attack one of the troopers. But this trooper was armed, unlike Robert, and ended the bear's violence with a fast dose of lead pacification. With the bear now dead, questions began to fill their minds. Was this the same bear that had stalked and killed Robert, or could it be a second bear? Robert's corpse was placed in a cadaver pouch and flown to a coroner's office in Anchorage for an autopsy. The bear's carcass was driven to Fairbanks for a necropsy and analysis by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Authorities were most interested in determining if the bear that had returned to the scene was in fact the bear that had killed and partially consumed Robert Weaver. After analyzing the bear's carcass and measuring the distance between its teeth to compare to the wounds on Robert's corpse, state biologists arrived at a conclusion. They determined that the bear was a middle-aged male, likely between 10 and 20 years of age. It weighed 230 pounds and had ample body fat, so it was not starving. Examining it for illness revealed that it was not rabid or infected by any other disease. Apart from its molars being worn down, the bear had no significant health problems. During the analysis, the bear's stomach was opened up to examine its contents. Tissues from Robert's body were found inside, indicating this had indeed been the bear that ate Robert, but was it the bear that had killed him? The investigation included a survey of the immediate area, and it indicated that there were no other bears in the vicinity. Given the lack of other bears, the black bear that was shot after sneaking up on the troopers was deemed the bear that also killed and consumed Robert Weaver. Authorities were quick to point out that there are 5 key factors to avoid being attacked by a bear. They state that people should avoid surprising bears, approaching them, or feeding them. Campers should avoid pitching camp on or near a trail and avoid bear food caches. But this advice isn't absolute, as Mr. Weaver's relative points out in a public letter following their uncle's attack. Weaver's nephew or niece points out that the black bear had been run off by the Weavers once before leaping from brush to ambush Robert, so it clearly was not surprised by their presence. The Weavers were trying to avoid the bear and hadn't set food out for it, so the second and third of the 5 factors do not apply either. They were entering their cabin, so they hadn't encroached upon a bear trail or travel route. During their investigation, authorities found no food caches the bear could have been defending, and it was a male, so it was not protecting its cubs. After excluding any other possibilities, the black bear's actions were deemed strictly predatorial. Following watching her husband be killed and eaten, then having the bear try to gain access to her inside of the cabin, Rita was left with PTSD. She'll likely have to deal with lingering effects from this attack the rest of her life. Over the last 50 years, there have been only 4 fatal black bear maulings in the state of Alaska, averaging at about 1 every 10 years. There are estimated to be 100,000 black bears in Alaska. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. With a very high population of black bears in Alaska, are you surprised at the low rate of fatal maulings by them? Do you think the presence of brown bears caused black bears to be less predatory or territorial? Given this bear was healthy and didn't have a lot of competition, why did it suddenly decide to start predating on human beings? Do you plan to start teaching people you go into the woods with how to operate firearms and carry bear spray? I hope so. I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the border of the Chugach State Park, just east of Anchorage, Alaska. The town of Eagle River is the namesake city of the Eagle River that runs through it. The river starts about 30 miles from town in the peaks of the Chugach Mountains and creates a beautiful valley as it flows to the Knik Arm. This valley is filled with foliage and salmon when they run each season, and is consequently a paradise for people and bears. About 2 miles before the Eagle River Nature Center is the last beacon of human development. It is a housing development that was built back in the 70s and overlooks the Eagle River Valley. The roads are carved into the hillside and hairpin as they climb the slope, dividing thick brush and trees. It may seem like a bastion of human triumph over nature, but the brown bears of the area seem to have missed the memo. This area is prime bear country, and numbers are increasing, so much so that the line between human zones and bear zones overlap, leading to dangerous confrontations. As we've discussed in prior episodes, sows that raise their cubs in areas close to human development tend to be larger and have larger cubs that survive at higher rates than sows in more remote areas. Today's episode is another example illustrating this phenomenon. On the afternoon of July 22, 2012, 50-year-old Bob Eater decided to head up one of the trails outside of his home for some fresh air. Bob's partner in crime was his beagle, Lewis. Beagles are known for their keen sense of smell and are hunting dogs, though their short, stout legs seem to belie that ability. Now, normally Bob would pack bear spray whenever he went out for a walk, but this time he forgot it back at his house. He rarely packed a gun while he was outside, despite one of his neighbors packing one while he mowed his lawn. Lewis usually alerted him of the presence of any animals, especially squirrels. His sharp sense of smell was like an early warning system, and Bob trusted in it. A short distance up the trail, the bushes along it grow very tall by midsummer. Alders and devil's club grow so closely together that they choke out a lot of the sunlight and make navigation through the area difficult. At over 6 feet tall in places, their thick branches and leaves reduce visibility to only a few feet and envelop the trail. As Bob and Lewis hiked their way up the trail, Bob made noise and talked to himself out loud to make sure any animals in the area knew he was there. He was a long-time resident and knew the risks and dangers moose and bears pose to people when caught unaware. Bob and Lewis rounded a hairpin that climbed a bit in the trail. After the trail flattened out, the path parted a thick patch of brush. It was the kind of place where you couldn't see what was there until you couldn't avoid it. As Bob walked through the patch, he was terrified by the most foreboding sight he could possibly see. Bob saw not one, but 4 huge brown bear heads pop up above the brush and turn in his direction. This may have been okay if the bears were a few hundred yards away, but all 4 bears were only 5 feet from him. Bob's legs instantly went weak, but he knew he could not overreact to this situation. He spun on his heels and took a casual step away from the bears when he felt a disorienting blow to the back of his head. The swat from the sow sent Bob into a front flip, and he landed on his back. He could see the bear, now upside down from his sudden change in perspective. She pounced on Bob, and they tumbled several yards down the steep hillside. The bear seemed infuriated at the surprise appearance of the man, and bit and clawed him in a tornado of teeth and claws. Bob didn't feel any of the gashes she opened up in his flesh, partly due to her speed, but also due to the effects of adrenaline. She clawed and attacked him for only about 15 seconds, and disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared. The cubs that were with her were probably about 3 years old and nearly grown, but didn't attack Bob. As soon as Bob gathered his senses, he sat up. The bear was nowhere to be found, but he didn't want to move until he was certain she was gone. Bob glanced down toward his left leg and could see an enormous gash that had been opened up, exposing his muscle and tearing away a large flap of flesh. His scalp on the back of his head was gashed, and he could feel his blood trickling down the back of his neck. There was a lot of pain in his shoulder and ribs. Bob peeked into the tears in his shirt and could see the perfect imprint of a massive bear paw on the left side of his chest. There were 4 enormous gashes about 3 inches long at the front of the bear paw-shaped bruise. Blood seeped from several round puncture wounds on his shoulder, caused by the sow biting him during the attack. Bob knew that his wounds were serious, and he couldn't waste any time in getting to medical help. He pulled himself to his feet and tested his wounded leg to see if it would support his weight. It may have been bleeding profusely and looked terrible, but it worked. Looking at his cell phone, he realized he couldn't call for help and would have to get himself to a place where he could get reception. Before departing, Bob removed his shirt and tied it around the injury to his thigh. He wanted to make sure to close the gaping wound to keep it as clean as possible and slow the bleeding. Walking as much as he could and sliding on his rear where he had to, Bob made it several hundred yards down the slope, while hoping and praying the sow was done with her business with him. A private driveway appeared in front of him, and he knew he was getting closer to rescue. Checking his cell phone, he could see that he had service, and he quickly dialed 911. About an hour after the attack, the sound of sirens filled the valley as the first responders searched for Bob's location. Without an address, they had resorted to taking directions provided by Bob as he directed the dispatcher to his location based on the sirens. After an initial assessment and aid, Bob was rushed back to a hospital in town. Pictures of Bob's wounds are graphic and wouldn't pass YouTube standards, so I've uploaded them on my Patreon account. If you would like to see them, you can access them from the link below this video. I warn you, they are graphic and terrifying as they show how large a single brown bear paw is and how much damage a single swat can do. After 4 days of intense medical attention, Bob regained consciousness. The staff there informed him they gave him 10 units of blood to replace his own that he lost. They also reported that he was in such bad shape that his body temperature had dropped to just above 90 degrees, which happens just before death when a person bleeds out. Bob spent 12 days in the hospital and was on antibiotics for 20 days afterward. He walked out of the hospital on his own power upon his release. Working hard on rehabilitating his body, Bob recovered enough to run a half marathon only 8 months after the attack. As for the sow and her cubs, authorities took no action against her. Bob's attack was defensive. She didn't kill him and consume him, so it was clear she did not have any predatory motives. Lewis was uninjured in the attack and accompanied Bob down the hill. The police officers took him to one of Bob's neighbors so they could take care of him. In response to Bob's attack, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game posted warning signs in the area and closed it to hikers. They stated that the sow was likely nowhere near the attack site, but giving her space would prevent another incident with her. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why didn't Lewis pick up the bear's scent and alert Bob? Would you have turned around after realizing you'd forgotten your bear spray, or keep going with your hike? Do you think Bob would have survived if he'd been further from medical help? How would you feel if 4 massive brown bear heads popped up above the brush only 5 feet from you? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.